What did the empires of India, China, Russia, Byzantium, even the Muslim caliphates, what do they all have in common? You can find out the answer to that after the intro. That's right, the Muslim caliphates, India, China, Russia, Byzantium, they all had one thing in common, and it might not be what you think. The thing in common was their biggest threat. The biggest threat to all these empires, and what would be the eventual conquerors of many of these empires at some point in history, were the people who lived in the steppes of Central Asia. The steppes were these large, vast grasslands that existed where there were nomadic people called the Huns and then eventually the Mongols. You'll remember back to the Huns in our study in Rome, and how they were the ones that eventually came into the Roman Empire and conquered and captured many lands from the Romans. Well, after the Huns, you get another group of people that come from the same area in the world, Central Asia, that are called the Mongols. And today we're going to be looking at the Mongol Empire and how it grew over time here in world history. In order to do this, we have to start with the first great Mongol leader. And the first great Mongol leader actually came to be the king of a tribe at the age of 13 years old. His name was Temujin, and Temujin actually used his popularity and he used a little bit of populism, which is something that we talk about in US history with Mr. Peterson. You can check that out right here. He used this populism to unite these tribes around him, and he becomes the leader of many tribes, and they give him the name Changus Khan. And Temujin becomes Changus Khan, and Changus Khan becomes one of the greatest conquerors that the world will ever see. Changus Khan understood the concept of unity, and what made the Mongols, or these steppe people, very powerful was that they could unite around a common cause and unite around their way of life. And Changus Khan builds up the armies and the militaries of these tribal kingdoms. He teaches them many different tactics of war, and then he unleashes them on all of Central Asia and begins to take over land from all of history's greatest empires. He starts off by conquering what is now northern China. He then moves his attention over to the Indus River Valley, and then he moves into parts of Persia. By the time that Changus Khan has died, he controlled more land than anybody in the world up until that point. What made the Mongols especially effective was their ability to be super mobile. Their nomadic lifestyle made it very easy for their military to move quickly and rapidly. They lived in yurts, and these yurts were round tents that they would be able to pack up and move very quickly. The horse was the most valuable weapon to the Mongol warriors, as many of them were mounted on horseback, and the most devastating sight for your city at this time was to see a wave of Mongol cavalry come over the hills. Many historians compare the Mongols to the ancient Assyrians in the tactics that they used to instill fear into the hearts of the people that they were conquering and into the hearts of the people that they had captured, or at least the people they left alive. After Changus Khan dies, his descendants then take control of his empire, but because it was so vast, you can see it on the map on the screen here, because of the vastness of Changus Khan's empire, we see that it eventually gets subdivided and many of his grandsons take over large portions of it. We're going to look at those grandsons and the areas that they conquer in the name of the Mongols here right now. The first grandson of Changus Khan is a man by the name of Kublai Khan, and Kublai Khan was famous for conquering what is now modern-day China. If you remember, his grandfather Genghis was able to conquer northern China, but he was not able to conquer the rest of it. Kublai Khan ends the Song dynasty as he moves into southern China and conquers it in the name of his Mongol horde. Kublai Khan and his Mongol forces then established the only foreign dynasty to rule all of China, and it's known in history as the Yuan dynasty. And the Yuan dynasty was Mongol rule over the Chinese people. Despite being a Mongol leader, we see that Kublai Khan was actually a very progressive leader, and a lot of his focus was on developing and strengthening the systems and infrastructures in China. He continues work on the Great Wall that famously did not keep the Mongols out of China. He starts to work on it himself. He builds lots of roads and highways. He encourages foreign trade and imports and exports. In fact, it was during the reign of Kublai Khan that one of history's greatest figures, Marco Polo, makes his expedition to China, and he stays in the court of Kublai Khan for several years, and then he returns to Europe with tales of this great land to the east. That was actually the Mongols in the Yuan dynasty in China. After the death of Kublai Khan, the Mongols would rule China under the Yuan dynasty for a few more years, but eventually, because they as the Mongols were suppressing and not allowing any of the ethnically Chinese to be in charge of their own leadership, we see that eventually there were rebellions and revolts, and the Mongol Yuan dynasty is toppled, and the Ming dynasty, or the Brilliant dynasty, begins. And then we see that because of this Mongol rule, China then closes off all of its borders to any sort of foreign influence, and that's going to have a huge impact on the Chinese culture and foreign relations with China from other nations for many years. But that's the Mongols in China. They become the Yuan dynasty under the reign of Changus Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan. While one son of Changus Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, is conquering in China, we see another one of his grandsons, a man by the name of Batu Khan, is conquering in Western Asia and parts of Eastern Europe. Batu Khan led the Mongols into Europe during the mid-1200s, and during this time he conquers land in Poland, in Hungary, he conquers many of the major cities in Russia, if you remember back to our lessons on Novgorod and Kiev. The Mongols, under the leadership of Batu Khan, known as the Golden Horde, set up their reign in Russia for what would eventually be 200 plus years. It was during this time that the Mongols in Russia, of the Golden Horde, expected these Russian cities to pay them tribute, and for the longest time they extracted tribute from these cities and ruled over them. But the culture of Russia continued to develop as well. However, it had a huge Mongol influence at this time. One city that would rise to the top here during the time of the Golden Horde in Russian history would be the city of Moscow. Now, if you recognize the city of Moscow, it's because that's the capital of the nation of Russia today, and this is when it becomes a huge city in world history. So Moscow becomes one of the major cities in Russia at this time. Eventually, Moscow becomes so powerful that the Grand Prince of Moscow, under the leadership of the Mongols, a man by the name of Ivan III, decided that he was no longer going to pay tribute to the Mongols. The Golden Horde at that time had been weakened severely by other attacks from other different people groups, some of them Mongols as well, that they actually could not even stand up to Ivan III and the people in Moscow. And this is the beginning of Eastern Europe and Western Asia shirking off the Mongol rule there from the Golden Horde. You'll want to remember that the Golden Horde was founded by Batu Khan in Eastern Europe and Western Asia. In the late 1300s, a descendant or a claimed descendant of Changus Khan himself tries to reunite and reignite the Mongol Empire that his great-great-grandfather had established. This guy was a man by the name of Timur the Lame, and he was known to Europeans as Tamerlane. Tamerlane struck out in all directions, trying to conquer as much as he could. He totally ransacks the city of Delhi, and he's recognized in history as a more ruthless and cruel person than Genghis Khan himself. And finally, and probably one of the most significant Mongol conquests in world history, was the Mongols that moved into the Indian subcontinent. Now, if you remember from our video on India, you can watch right here, maybe if I remember to put the link in, you'll remember that the Indian subcontinent was protected on three sides by water, and then on the northern side by the Himalayan mountains. But eventually some Mongols come in through the Khyber Pass, and they're led by a man named Babur. Babur, or the Tiger as he was known, which is a pretty solid nickname. If you're gonna go with a nickname like, you know, the Tiger, that's good work. Good job, Babur. Babur was apparently a descendant of Changus Khan and Tamerlane at the same time. I don't know how. We'd all have to look at the family tree on that one. But Babur takes his Mongol forces, he moves down into the Indian subcontinent, he attacks and sets up what's known in Indian history and now world history as the Mughal Empire. Very close to Mongol, but different, although it is kind of like the Hindu word for Mongol is Mughal. Anyways, the Mughal Empire controlled a significant portion of the Indian subcontinent for hundreds of years. During this time, we see the rule of men like Akbar, and Akbar was a famous Mughal ruler, and he actually institutes Islam as the official religion of the Mughal Empire and spreads Islam all throughout the Indian subcontinent. So now India has Hinduism, it has Buddhism, and then it also has the influence of Islam, creating a very interesting culture, one that's also unfortunately ripe for conflict here in world history to come. Okay, so that is the story of the Mongols. Super brief, but we see they come to power under Changus Khan, they attack, they take over more land than any other empire in history. Eventually they get divided into several different smaller Mongol empires. You have the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, you have the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe under Batu Khan, you have Tamerlane trying to reignite the Mongol Empire, and then finally you have the Mughals in India under men like Babur and then eventually Akbar. The Mongols have been incredibly influential in world history, especially in the histories of Asia and the Middle East. If you enjoyed this lesson, if you learned a little bit, go ahead and give it a like, and we'll see you guys in the next one.